Hello, I'm Linda with Thistledown and Company, and today I'm doing a video tutorial for you on how to get an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance for your quilting, because it's very important that your 1/4 inch seam allowance is accurate so that your blocks turn out the size that they're supposed to be and they match each other. So there is a trick to it, and we'll show you how. We'll get started. So to figure out if your seam allowance is accurate, you're going to do a stitch test. And you're going to take 3 pieces of fabric cut 1.5 inches wide and just a few inches long. So then you're going to put it where you think your 1/4 inch is, whether it's a 1/4 inch foot or you can move your needle position. My machine allows me to move my needle position left and right. So I thought that if I move my needle position to 2.5 on my machine and use the edge of my regular foot and stitched it out, that would be an accurate 1/4 inch seam. Well, the way you find out if it is you stitch it out, press your outside fabrics to the outside, and then take your quilt acrylic ruler, which is very accurate, and lay it on the center strip. And it should measure 1 inch, and this does not. It's a little smaller than 1 inch, which means our seam allowance is too big. So we need a smaller seam allowance. So that one, not right. So we're gonna ditch the 2.5. So then I moved my needle position to position 3 on my machine and stitched it out and then measured it, and that works. Now I have 1 inch for my center strip. So I can use my regular foot and just move my needle position to 3, and I have an accurate seam allowance. Now also, a lot of machines come with, or you can purchase, a 1/4 inch foot. This is the one for my machine. And so I tested it and used, the edge of the foot as my guide and stitched it out, and then take this on, and sure enough, it's 1 inch. So this 1/4 inch foot is accurate, but I don't like that foot, so I usually just move my needle position. So it just depends upon if you have a good 1/4 inch foot. If it tests out true and you like it, go ahead and use it. If not, if you can move your needle position, you can do so. So once you have it figured out whether you're going to use your foot or change your needle position, and you have your 1/4 inch figured out, then we've got a really neat product that will help you stitching that 1/4 inch. So we're going to go over here, and I'm going to move my needle to position 3 on my machine. So it's moved over to the right, and so I can use the edge of this foot, and there is, put my foot down, there's this neat product called Sewing Edge by Marcy Baker. And what it is, it's a plastic strip with sticky on the back, but it's a repositionable sticky. So then you come over to your machine and you put it up against the edge of your foot, whether it's the 1/4 inch foot or your regular foot, and then you lay it down and towards the front. So that gives you a long edge to guide your fabric, because it's tall enough that your fabric kind of bumps up to it, and so keeps you on track. So it gives you a longer edge to guide your fabric when you're sewing your seam. And what's nice is it's repositionable. So it's not a permanent fixture on your machine by any means, and it doesn't leave any residue. I peel it up and there's no residue at all. So, and there's multiples in the pack, so when they get too linty, you can change it. So now we're going to set our seam, which means pressing it before you press it open. You set the stitches with your iron. and that kind of locks all the threads in. And then press it to the outside. Okay, and our next piece. And things that affect your 1/4 inch seam, they refer to the 1/4 inch seam in quilting many times. You'll hear the terminology is scant 1/4 inch, and that's because the thread and the turn of the cloth take up space in the seam. I'll show you in a moment what I mean. And so if you stitch a 1/4 inch seam, what measures a true 1/4 inch, by the time you add thread and the turn of the cloth, that takes up space in the seam. And so stitching a scant 1/4 inch makes up for those things. Okay, let's measure this one. And there we go, we have an inch. So use the sewing guide, the sewing edge, once you've established your 1/4 inch seam. But it is very important that you find and mark down how you achieve your 1/4 inch seam. If it is by moving your needle position, you might want to leave like a little note on the face of your machine saying needle position 3, so that when you sit down to sew, you remember to move it over to position 3, and you remember which position works for your 1/4 inch seam. Also, if you're sewing a quilt, it's always best to use the same machine throughout the entire project. I have multiple machines. I brought this one today because it has a lot of decorative stitches and I was doing another tutorial. But the machines will vary, so it's always best to use the same machine for one project. So, but you want to make sure that your seam allowances are accurate, because let's say you're doing a block exchange with some friends, and so the block is supposed to finish at 10 inches. And so you exchange a block with your friend Nancy, and oh my gosh, her block is only 9 3/4 inches. So when you get all the blocks from all your friends, one might be 9 3/4, one might be 10 1/4, one might be 9 5/8. They might be all over the place because their seam allowances aren't accurate. So now you have all these odd size blocks that you're trying to put together, and it's a real mess. And so, you know, that doesn't work out so well. And, you know, if you're doing like a group quilt, you know, for a guild or something like that, and you're turning them in, you know, the person in charge of trying to put all those blocks together, it can be a real nightmare if they don't match. So, and the smaller the quilt, the more important the accurate seam, because there's a lot more seams in some of these small miniature quilts. And so if the allowance is not accurate, it's really going to throw it off. So find and achieve your perfect scant 1/4 inch seam, and your quilt blocks will be even lovelier than they were before. So I hope you find this helpful. Give it a try. And if you like my tutorials, please share and subscribe. And thank you, and happy stitching.